let's learn how we can write to and even create new files using Python. So let's create a new document or a new script window, and when we save this, it's very important where we save it as, and this may not work on your Google Drive, so you may want to try saving it to your desktop just for this test feature. If we find out that it does work to Google Drive, someone let me know, but it may be best to use your desktop. Let's call this new .py. Now the reason where we save it is important is because when we create this file, unless we specify otherwise, the file will be created in the same directory as which we have this py file saved. So in this case on my desktop. Okay, I'm going to create a variable called text and just put something in there. So we were working with SpongeBob earlier, so why not continue with that, right? Because he's the coolest. Okay, so to create a new file, we're going to create a variable that will represent opening the file. So we're just going to call it F, and we'll do open. And we have a couple arguments that we need to do here. We need to list the name of the file. Now, if this file doesn't exist, it will create it. And we're just going to save it as a text file. And then we need whether we're writing to this file or whether we're reading to this file. And there's a couple more arguments we'll talk about later. But I'm going to write to this file. Okay, and now we can just say, hey, we're going to do f.write, and let's write our text. And then it's super important that we then close this. Now later we'll learn a different way to write to a file it will automatically close for us, but there's more involved in that, so we're just going to start with this now. Okay, so that's going to open a file. Giving that W there allows us to write to the file. It's going to write whatever we have in text, and then it's going to close the file. So when we run this, nothing's going to happen in our shell, but if you navigate to wherever you have something saved or wherever you saved it, on my desktop, I have a file called myfile.txt. And when I open that file, it says SpongeBob SquarePants. So you have created a new file and written to that file using Python. Now, if we can write to a file, we should be able to read that file from Python. So I've kept a little bit of the same code, just modify your code so that it looks like this. So now instead of having a W, we'll have an R, and that means read only. We're just going to read from the file. We're not going to write from the file. And then we're going to use a loop to read each line in the file and print to our shell. And then you can go ahead and close the file once you're finished. So if we F5 this, then yes, indeed, it did have SpongeBob SquarePants. And if we had multiple lines, it would print our multiple lines. Take a look at this script file. What do you think this is going to do? Pause the video for just a second and study the code and see if you can predict what will happen with this code. Okay, so this, of course, is creating a file called myText, and we are writing to that file. We are using a loop to write 10 different numbers, which we are converting to strings before we write, and then including a new line, which is basically a line break. The I starts at 0, so we should have 0 through 9. And if we look at the file, we do indeed have 0 through 9. Okay, so we have executed this code to write to the file. We could also execute some code to read that file. So this is what the read code could look like. And in this case, we used the readLine method. This readLine method will return the line sequentially, since we're in a loop. And if it doesn't return anything, if it returns an empty string, that means it's reached the end of the document. So if it reaches the end of the document, we'll break out of this loop, but otherwise it's going to print each line. So if we executed this code, it would look like this, printing 0 through 9. What if we wanted to do even more with this? What if we wanted to take these numbers that were in our text file and add them? So we have to access them from some way. So we need to open that file, and we're going to read the contents of that file. We can create a variable called sum, and initialize it. And then using a loop for line in F, we're going to strip. What does the strip method do? Do you remember from the last tutorial? It removes basically that new line character, because we had that new line character so that each number would print on a different line. So that's going to remove all of that. And then we're saying store that in a variable called number. So each time it's going to store it in a number, changing it to an int so we can do math with it. And then it's going to add that number to the current sum and then store it back into the sum. Once the loop has completed, it's going to print the sum and then close the file. So if we run this code, we get the sum is 45.